Welcome to the first episode of Left Scotland, a new bi-weekly breakdown of politics on the left in Scotland. You may remember me from the Indie Ref Weekly Review, a show that I produced during the referendum. Well, now it's bigger than that. It's time to move past who voted yes and who voted no, and onto what we can do to build the progressive country that we've been shouting about this whole time. Join me, Scotland, as we take a look at the big changes our country is going through. This week, I'll be looking at Trident, land reform, and the Buchanan Steps. But first, on the 27th of November, the Smith Commission published its report on what further powers should be devolved to Scotland following the no vote in the referendum. The group consisted of representatives from the SNP, the Scottish Greens, Labour, the Lib Dems and the Conservatives. Now, with three pro-union parties against only two who supported independence, many suspected that the battle for meaningful new powers would be disappointing. But how did this even come about? Well, in the final days of the referendum, when the first polls began to show a majority in favour of independence, the pro-union parties pledged extensive new powers to the Scottish Parliament if we would just vote to stay part of the UK. This is best recognised as The Vow, which was published in the Daily Record. However, for a time before that, there was much discussion of what Scotland should expect. Ed Miliband and Danny Alexander promised that they would deliver Home Rule. Gordon Brown stated that we should get a near federal state. Even the BBC reported that we should expect to see Devo Max. So, what does all this mean? Devo Max has always been accepted to mean all powers being devolved to Scotland except for Foreign Affairs and Defence, which would remain at Westminster. It's the maximum state of devolution, and if we were looking at just tax and welfare, it would look like this. Now, this is what polls reveal 66% of Scots are in support of. Yet, despite the promises made, what the Smith Commission is proposing looks something closer to this. Can you see the difference? Now, during the big debate, George Galloway actually promised us Devo Supermax if we voted no, which is neither this nor this, but presumably something magical just over the rainbow. What's even more galling about the whole situation is that either the press have chosen to misrepresent the truth or have failed to understand it. The Daily Record published that the vow had been delivered. The Scottish Labour Party have stated that the vow has been delivered. You know what's been delivered so far? Nothing. The Smith Commission has put forward only recommendations of what should be devolved, and it's now up to Westminster to actually devolve those powers. So, what are the chances of that happening? Part of that package of new recommended powers includes air passenger duty tax. Many folk don't realise that the Calman Commission, a previous report that made recommendations of which powers to devolve to Scotland, recommended that that be devolved to Scotland back in 2009, and it never happened. So yeah, some of the powers that the Smith Commission recommend devolving are powers that a previous commission also recommended should be devolved 5 years ago. Now, I am all for the new powers that are to be devolved to the Scottish Parliament, but we need to really accept that not only do these powers fall far short of what was promised, but in other ways the vow has failed completely. One of the key priorities of the vow was to make the Scottish Parliament a permanent institution, since, as it currently stands, Westminster could disband it tomorrow if they felt like it. Even Lord Smith, who oversaw the Commission, has stated that this has not been achieved. At best, he can just make it a legal minefield to pull off. Richard Murphy from Tax Research UK has stated that the devolution of income tax but no further related powers is half a power at best, providing revenue collection rights but no control over money. In the final hours of the Commission, it seems that Labour stepped in to ensure that minimum wage would not be devolved, taking away our ability to raise it to the living wage. Sources indicate that Labour, the Lib Dems and the Conservatives were constantly on the phone back to their parties in London, taking instructions over which proposals to block and remove, stripping out many of the proposed extensive new powers in the final days before the report was published. Now, given how hostile these parties have been in overseeing this process, and the fact that many Conservative backbenchers continue to say that they will block any further powers being devolved to Scotland, I'd be waiting to see what happens next before shouting about delivering anything. Every 10 years, the UK government has the option to renew a piece of legislation called the Mutual Defence Agreement, which is basically an agreement between the UK and the US for cooperation in using atomic energy for defence purposes. Nuclear weapons, in other words. Earlier this year, the UK government renewed this agreement for another 10 years, despite the fact that the vote on whether or not we even replace Trident nuclear missiles isn't until 2016. And despite that vote being so far away, they've also just spent £37 million on 12 new missile tubes. So, rather than waiting to see whether or not there is a democratic mandate to renew and run Trident nuclear missiles at a cost of £130 billion to the taxpayer, they're just ploughing ahead with it. So, last Saturday I went along to the demo outside of FASLANE, where the UK's nuclear weapons are stored, to speak with Scrap Trident.
Today we're having a big demonstration outside FASLANE because we realised during the independence referendum that Trident was a really important issue for people in Scotland, a hugely important issue. They had been engaged in politics in a way that we've never seen. In my lifetime I've never actually seen that, and they wanted to do something. That we've got all these people here. We had organised for 800 people to be here, then there's people on top of that, so there's certainly 1,000 people here, and these people are all experts in Scottish politics. It's really interesting. Politics is no longer something for professional politicians, it's something that every single ordinary person here can engage in. Trident is illegal. Okay. Any weapon which is indiscriminate, which can't distinguish between civilians and service personnel, is illegal. Trident is illegal. It's a weapon of mass destruction. If you fire Trident, it will kill millions of people at a stroke, from the smallest baby to the oldest person in a city. They're all dead, regardless. It's a moral question. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we have it here in this country. So we wanted to give an outlet for that. So we decided to have a demonstration called Trident Still Has to Go Now. Yes or no, Trident still has to go. That's what this is about. On May the 7th there's going to be a UK election. Now, the people of Scotland could send a big block of MPs to Westminster who are anti-Trident, who belong to anti-Trident parties. That could put us in a really strong position, because in 2016 the decisions to be made at Westminster whether to go ahead with replacing the Trident replacement, which we know is going to cost £100 billion, every group of MPs could say no to that, and we could end Trident once and for all, because the people of Scotland are anti-Trident, and we want them to show that at the ballot box.
Links below to both Scrap Trident and the Scottish campaign for nuclear disarmament if you'd like to find out more. Nicola Sturgeon has already started to make an impact as Scotland's new First Minister by proposing some radical land reform that's actually pretty radical. So here's the problem: just 432 people own 50% of privately owned land in Scotland. That's a fraction of the population, just 0.008% owning half of the privately owned land here. This is a problem and issue that dates right back to the Highland clearances in the 1800s, when folk were kicked out of their homes to make way for sheep and stags because they were more profitable to the landed elite. And on top of that, only 26% of Scotland's land is even registered to its owners, meaning it's really difficult to find out who even owns the land. The reforms have been causing a pretty interesting reaction in the Conservative press, who find it simply appalling that large, multi-million pound sporting estates where the rich retire to hunt pheasants will now have to pay non-domestic rates, just like your local pub already does. There isn't enough time this week to really get into it, but you can find links below to Andy Whiteman and the Scottish Land Action Movement, where you can find out more. It's a fascinating subject and well worth looking further into. Glasgow City Council are in the middle of approving plans to demolish the Buchanan Street Steps to make way for a large glass atrium entrance into the shopping centre to replace the other entrance that is literally a few metres further away. This is just one example of Glasgow City Council's recent plans to bring civic and public space into private ownership, including their scheme to rent out sections of Victoria Park and to demolish the Barrowland Park and replace it with more shops. Now, the steps have become an iconic part of Glasgow, both for political and cultural reasons, so it's no surprise that a campaign has already been launched to save them.
The concert hall steps at the top of Buchanan Street are a really important public space in Glasgow city centre, and it's a place where people pause for their lunch or they meet up with friends and family. They can get some fresh air in the middle of a busy working day. It's a place where people can gather and have demonstrations and protests in a very peaceful and constructive way that grabs the attention of passers-by. So the City Council at the moment are planning a £500 million development plan, and the first step of that would be to demolish the iconic steps at the top of Buchanan Street. Most recently, Glasgow City Council threatened to demolish the Barrowland Park just in the east end of the city centre. That was built especially for the Commonwealth Games and has become a very popular spot for families who live in that part of town. In recent years, they tried to remove the cone from the Wellington statue outside Goma. We managed to stop that from happening. So I suppose this is just one in a series of oppositions to the council that Glasgow's public are keen to make. The reason that the City Council are saying that they're making this development, or pushing this development through rather, is so that they can expand in terms of business in the city centre, but we consider this to be an entirely flawed argument because currently there are many open, empty shop plots that are sitting without anything in them. So if the council genuinely wanted to improve business and investment in the area, then there already are many options that they could be tapping into, and they're failing to do that with these current plans.
That's everything for the first episode of Left Scotland. Expect a slightly different episode next time as the programme evolves into what I kind of really want it to be. You can follow Left Scotland on Facebook or myself on Twitter. Please do like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Now get out there, get educated and get involved.